Hi guys, today is day 4. Focus question is, why was the Battle of Stalingrad the turning point of the entire war? So, the better question, or a better rephrase of this question could be, why was Stalingrad the place and time when the Nazis stopped winning and started losing? The Battle of Stalingrad happens right in here in Europe. We're moving back to Europe, so we were in Asia, now we're back in Europe. The Battle of Stalingrad happens between the Nazi-dominated Europe and the Soviet-dominated Eurasia. It happens from 23 August to the 2nd of February. This is a 7-month battle. So the question is, what went wrong with the Nazi invasion of the USSR? If the question is, why did the Nazis start losing, then let's see what went wrong. So you would think that it would go well because Stalin had purged his best generals. He had killed a bunch of his best generals. However, to even the playing field, Hitler undermined his generals. He forbade them from retreating, and he told them that he was in charge of strategy, not them, and that he knew better. Rommel had been defeated in North Africa. German armies were sort of already in a losing streak, which maybe, perhaps, led the Nazis to take risks that they maybe shouldn't have taken. They already were losing, or they had already lost, I guess, the Battle of Britain. Bombing Britain and bombing London wasn't working. And so maybe these losses tricked the Nazis into taking risks that they should not have taken. So at the beginning, it seemed to be going well. The Luftwaffe led its raids. The German army tried to blitzkrieg its way through the Soviet Union. You can see here, leaving Greater Germany, the area already conquered, heading through Poland and out into the Soviet Union, heading towards Stalingrad, heading towards Moscow, heading towards Leningrad. One of the problems, though, is that they changed their mind a couple of times midway en route to these different targets. So originally the targets were Leningrad and Moscow. Stalingrad wasn't really a major target. The targets were really down here to get the oil fields and resources like that. And then Hitler changed his mind and said, instead, we're going to focus on Stalingrad. It's a medium good target strategically, but it's mostly assumed that he wanted to attack Stalingrad because it was named Stalingrad, and he wanted to punch Stalin in the nose. Very quickly, though, as these supply lines got longer and longer and the Soviets retreating scorched the earth as they left, meaning they burned all the resources, they burned the farms, they burned all the things that the Germans maybe would want to capture. It meant that Germany had to bring supplies all the way from here, all the way over to the battles every time they needed something. Airlifts were not really possible because the Soviets destroyed the airfields, and also there were significant traffic jams in this area down here on the way to Stalingrad, so driving on the roads. This is farm country. The roads are largely narrow, so traffic jams of tanks and supply trucks were a huge problem. So we know the Nazis made some mistakes. So what made Stalingrad so deadly? This mentality that both sides had of never giving up. Let's get rid of that. One of the problems at Stalingrad is that once Hitler got his troops here to surround the city, Stalin had his troops to defend the city, and the poor civilians in the middle of the city, they were all ordered to not retreat. So the civilians were not allowed to evacuate, the Soviet troops weren't allowed to retreat, but at the same time, the Germans were not allowed to retreat as well. From the 23rd of August to the 25th of August, the Nazis bombed the city with 1,000 tons of explosives to sort of get it ready for invasion. And the bombing continued daily through November. There were military factories in the city, and so that's part of the reason why people weren't allowed to evacuate. But on the other hand, Stalin believed that Soviet troops would defend the city better if they knew their families were stuck inside it. The bombing by the German Air Force actually made it more difficult to take the city because instead of running from street to street, you couldn't run across the street anymore. There's craters in the middle of the street. You imagine having to run down the crater and up the other side. Urban warfare inside cities, is much more deadly because amidst the rubble, there are a lot more places to hide. Also, amidst the rubble are going to be civilians mixed up with the combatants, and that's going to make it much more difficult for people to decide who to shoot and who not to shoot. Lots of civilians die. There's an estimated 40,000 Soviets died in the initial attack alone, and then the battle continued for months. What did the Battle of Stalingrad mean for the Soviet people? So, what about the civilians, the people who weren't allowed to leave the city? Um, there were approximately 40,000 civilian casualties, approximately 1,100,000 military casualties in this battle. It was incredibly, incredibly deadly. These are civilian women here, here, and here, digging defenses around and in the city, digging trenches. Here's some people on the rooftops. Civilians in Stalingrad, many were given weapons, often short-range weapons and things that the military didn't have a use for. These short-range weapons were exceptionally good in the short-range fighting of sort of house-to-house, street-to-street combat. And then this photo down here is to highlight the stress of the order to not evacuate. So these are old people, babies, children, mothers who were not allowed to evacuate because of Stalin's order to never give up the city. And many of these people ended up dying, not just from wounds and from being shot, but later on from starving and lack of food. One evacuation boat was arranged. A bunch of kids got on the boat to go down the river to escape the city, and then the Nazi forces sank the ship. So it was a very stressful time for anybody with children. You'd have to try to keep them safe amidst all of this. So that brings us to our last question. Why did the German war machine fail? Like, Germany's military functioned like a machine. It had the blitzkrieg, where all the different parts of the military worked together in cooperation. And this war machine, it failed. The Air Force was not able to bring in enough supplies. They could only bring in maybe 80 tons of supplies per day, and they needed about 700 tons of supplies. The German military went to Russia wearing summer uniforms. Now it's winter, and it is very, very cold. The Soviets have winter gear. They have winter supplies. They have incredible boots like these here, and they have these parkas and fur-lined hats. They have these white sort of poncho pants things that go over your uniform for camouflage in the snow. And the Germans have their summer uniforms, and this guy has like a shirt wrapped around his head to keep warm. Utterly, completely miserable, with temperatures between 20 and 40 below zero, freezing to death, frostbite. All of those things are major problems. This is a German soldier who had fallen down in the snow, froze to death, and was propped back up like a frozen human popsicle, just to give you an idea of how terrifying it was. Starvation became a real problem with the lack of supplies among both German and Soviet troops. Frostbite was a major problem for German troops especially, and these supply shortages were made worse by the fact that everyone was freezing cold all the time. All the plans said that it was going to be a fast war. The Germans were going to get in and get out. And so the war machine didn't really make plans for a long-term war. Part of the problem with Germany's spectacular, powerful, advanced tanks is that their engines wouldn't start in the super-duper cold weather of Russia. The troops were lighting fires under the tanks, lighting fires under the trucks to try to thaw out the engines to get them to start. Obviously, that's a risky practice, assuming you even can get a fire going. Also, one more thing, and this is not to be discarded, this propaganda here reminds us the Soviets did not see this as a world war. They saw this as defense of their country, a defense of their homeland. Soviets don't really refer to it as world war. They refer to it as the Great Patriotic War. It was an opportunity to punch the Nazis in the face and kick them out of their homeland. All right. In conclusion, put it all together. Why was this battle the turning point for the entire war? Why was this battle the time when the Soviets started to win and the Germans started to lose?